So it's do or die right now in Hong Kong. The protests have intensified and would have pretty much passed the point of no return for a lot of these people. With China's pervasive surveillance system and facial recognition software, I have no doubt that even if everyone picked up and went home right now, all the folks, or a good portion of the folks, could be rounded up and sent off to gulags if they fail in what they're doing right now. Of course, what they're doing is occupying the Hong Kong airport, in case you haven't heard. They are shut down the airport. There are no flights now in or out of Hong Kong. And this is, of course, because they want to get the government's attention. The Hong Kong protesters are pretty well fed up, most of them. I think that the extradition bill certainly set off a powder keg in Hong Kong of frustration of the native population with the mainland Chinese folks. And as some have pointed out, these are, to a lesser extent, ethno-linguistic tensions as well as political tensions, but I'm sure the main driving force here is not the fact that you have so many folks in Hong Kong now speaking Mandarin, which is, of course, not the native language there. Cantonese is, but it is largely a frustration with the Chinese Communist Party and a desire not to be ruled by a communist dictatorship. Now, of course, I've said for a long time that I think that the British giving Hong Kong to Red China was a big mistake in the first place, because for those of you who don't know, the reason why Britain possessed Hong Kong for 99 years is that they signed a 99-year lease after the end of the Opium Wars, which was, essentially an annexation, but they made it seem like it was somewhat voluntary between them and the Qing dynasty, which ruled China at that time. And, of course, 99 years later, when the lease expired, the Qing dynasty no longer existed and could not take possession of Hong Kong. So when Britain's lease expired, they really didn't have anyone legally who they should give it to. But the way that they got around it is they said, oh, well, we leased it from China, in a general sense, meaning like the geographic area, which doesn't make any sense because governments are not geographic areas. They are, organizations. They are abstract concepts. They're not pieces of land. This is why when the Soviet Union took over what used to be the Russian Empire, all of the contracts with various arms dealers that the Tsar had signed during World War I and had not fulfilled upon his death were not paid off by the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union said those were the Tsar's debts. They're not our debts. They're not Russia's debts. And so the same reasoning applies here. The Communist Chinese do not take over the leased property that was left by the Qing dynasty. Britain was under no obligation to give that property to anyone other than a member of the Qing dynasty. And of course, the Qing dynasty has, pretty well been domesticated into communist Chinese society. I believe they are still alive, but they have no power and no pride or anything. I believe I saw a news story about the man who would be the emperor today, where the Qing dynasty is still in place, and he was working as some mid-level bureaucrat in Beijing with absolutely no power, no prestige, and no pride. And so what Britain would have done, what any reasonable legal mind would have done, would have held on to Hong Kong because their landlord was deceased and had no heirs. Hong Kong was essentially unowned, and so Britain could have kept possession of Hong Kong for as long as they wanted. But instead, for some ungodly reason, they decided to try to just pawn it off to the Communist Chinese. They sold out their own people for no money. So after 20 years of communist rule in Hong Kong, I think people are finally fed up, because it's becoming increasingly clear that China is not becoming more like Hong Kong. Hong Kong is becoming more like China over those 20 years, and folks are not happy about it. And so that brings us to this moment where the protesters have essentially been able to shut down the Hong Kong economy. There are no flights in or out, and without an active airport in a place like Hong Kong, which is really doesn't have much road travel going into it. It's all really international flights. Hong Kong is kind of a world city. The airport is important to the economy. Now, I have to be honest, I don't really know how these folks are going to be able to get what they want. The communists are not exactly going to give Hong Kong, independence or give it, free elections at this point. I think that the Chinese really have a pretty great stomach for violent retribution when it comes to disloyal subjects. I mean, that, after all, is how they justified the killings of the students in Tiananmen Square back in 1989. I watched some interviews with Chinese people from around that time, and they couldn't believe that the students were so ungrateful for everything that the previous generation had built, that they would rebel in this way, and that they would claim somehow that there was a better way that things could be done. They essentially saw people who question the Communist Party as spoiled children. And so I'd have to imagine that they see the folks in Hong Kong in much the same way. Officially, however, the Chinese government has been dropping hints that they really don't take these protests seriously. They don't think that it really represents the general interests of the folks in Hong Kong, and that they think this is essentially a CIA color revolution. And to some extent, they seem to be correct. From what I've been seeing reports that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA front funded by the U.S. Congress, has been funding some of these protesters. They have been trying to help organize them. However, this is not a 100% NED job. There is no way that the NED could set up something this big. The NED could certainly be helping, and it looks like they are. It does look like, the CIA would like there to be unrest in Hong Kong. That's, it's for pretty obvious reasons. The U.S. wants to try and stir up trouble in China, but they are not doing all this. This is not, completely inorganic. There is a significant portion of the population in Hong Kong that wants nothing to do with the Communist Party of China, nor should they want anything to do with the Communist Party of China. If I were in their position, would I be willing to work with the NED or the CIA to try and achieve my goals? If I'm worried about, getting gulagged or, the social credit system or all that crap, I mean, you think I'm worried about the tyranny of the CIA? No, the CIA is a much lesser evil compared to the Communist Party of China. I'm the biggest critic of U.S. regime change operations that's around, pretty much. But if I were in the position of one of these people, I would happily work with the CIA. Even though I, as an American, wish the CIA would just mind their own business and not go meddling in other people's countries, because I think that creates trouble for us here at home in America. And of course, it doesn't help with these rumors when you see some of these overzealous Hong Kong folks actually waving American flags. That just gets kind of creepy. Now, I assume the rationale that they would give for doing that officially is not that, we're not CIA puppets. It's just we're trying to, signal to the Americans and hope that they'll see us waving their flags in the press and they'll be sympathetic to our cause. That's probably the justification they give. But still, when you're trying not to look like CIA shills, waving an American flag is not the best idea. And so to top it all off this morning, the Global Times, which is, the Chinese state media, it's their sort of English publication, they put out a video from the military, complete with very dramatic, Zero Hedge call it World War III style music, which is a bit hyperbolic, but it gets the point across. It's certainly very dramatic, and it shows videos of tanks driving across the country towards Hong Kong and mounting their forces in Shenzhen, which is, of course, the city, the big city right across in mainland China from Hong Kong. And the message of the video was, hey, we're sending in the tanks. You folks are all going to die. It's Tiananmen 2.0. This is, the Prague Spring being wiped out. This is 1953 in Hungary. I believe it was 1953. Or no, maybe it was 1956. I'm thinking of 1953 in Iran. But either way, it was, a pretty obvious message. Hey, we've seen this movie before. We're sending in the tanks. We're going to crush your protest. There will be no freedom. Because remember, in the history of uprisings against communist governments, the only ones that succeeded were the ones that the government allowed to succeed. It was when Gorbachev stopped sending in the tanks that these protests actually started bearing fruit and that people actually got what they wanted. The Berlin Wall didn't come down until Gorbachev made it clear that, hey, East Germany, we're not going to help you out. We're not sending in the tanks. We're not going to stop this. You have to handle your own affairs. Once he took away that tool, things fell apart. But, in China, that tool is definitely on the table, and it looks like they're about to use it. So to me, the only question now is, will the West step in to try and intervene in some way more directly, other than just, funding protesters through covert operations? That's something that I would find very difficult to believe. I can't see any direct military intervention, certainly in Hong Kong. I don't think that'll happen. But perhaps some more direct action like sanctions on China or something to that effect. Of course, that would be a pretty insane and revolutionary development for the global economy if somehow China was sanctioned. Considering how much international trade they do with the rest of the world, yes, that would hurt China, but it would hurt the rest of the world significantly as well. But certainly that's what the Hong Kong protesters are hoping for. They're hoping that the West will bail them out. But I'm afraid that the Hong Kong folks may end up in this case like the Kurds and left out to dry. But I guess we shall see. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.